of the risk for street and area flooding, even some flash flooding too. So joining me, of course, Houston Chronicle meteorologist Justin Ballard. We're talking about flood risks and something that we can see here in the Houston. We know it all too well in the Houston area. So let's go over these flood risk categories and some data that you found about them.
Oh, we actually have some video from earlier this morning's flooding that was ongoing, across Houston. So North Houston, along the Interstate 45 North corridor. I believe it was a feeder road. We actually had some of that flooding going on. So the feeder roads, that whole area, you see that, that's kind of the spot where you watch this time of during this kind of pattern, and that's exactly where we were seeing the flooding earlier this morning. So let's talk a little bit about first flash flood climatology. I mean, obviously Houston's no stranger to that. We've seen plenty of it, plenty of scenes just like that. Be careful when you do have to drive through water like that. Of course, don't drive through it if it's completely flooded. But overall, we're talking anywhere from 150, 160 reports of flash flooding since 1992, I believe.
Okay, so there's your graphic.
From 1992 to 2019, 151 reports of flash flooding in Southeast Texas during the month of June. Now, that comes in, what, third place, it looks like here. Obviously, October is well known for flooding, so too is May, and then June. We do drop off, though, as we head into next month, so that's good. But overall, this is the scene that we're looking at today and possibly Thursday and Friday, flash flood risks continuing.
Right, and it's not just that risk for street flooding, but flash flooding as well. And we show these maps all the time. It's a risk of 2, 3 out of 4. So tell me a little bit about this, because I know some people think that these are also like the Storm Prediction Center maps we show, but they're different.
It does look very similar at first glance, but they are different. So as you mentioned, 2, 3. So that 2 is in the yellow shading, covers much of Houston, Harris County, all of Houston, Harris County. The highest risk just north of our area. Now, what does it mean? So that red shading that you see is a moderate risk. Again, that level 3 out of 4, and that basically means that there's a at least a 40% chance of exceeding flash flood guidance.
That's pretty high.
Now, what does that mean, flash flood guidance? It basically means that within a certain amount of time, usually 1, 3, 6, I think it goes up to 24 hours, you see a certain amount of rain. In this instance, I believe that kind of threshold is 4 or 5 inches of rain, so up to 4 or 5 inches in about 6 hours, which certainly possible, you know, in some of the heaviest downpours. And then that slight risk means that you've got at least a 15% chance of kind of exceeding that flash flood guidance. So all in all, between the next 2, say, days or so, I mean, we certainly could be dealing with flash flooding. More
than what we would normally see on a normal day. That is that kind of street flooding or that area flooding we talk about. And we use flash flooding, of course, that terminology very carefully, because that means something different here in Southeast Texas.
It really does. I mean, I know we use a lot of words sometimes that may sound similar, you know, but all in all, there is a very big difference between flash flooding and kind of the run-of-the-mill sort of street flooding that we're used to dealing with, of course, here in Southeast Texas. So flash flooding occurs very rapidly, again, usually within about 6 hours or so. Now, street flooding, area flooding, which is, I would say some of what we saw this morning is really mainly the street flooding variety, but that is slower to kind of onset. It's more of a spilling of water onto normally dry land. So think about low-lying areas, think about rivers, creeks, streams. Those kinds of things are usually what kind of flood first, as opposed to the flash flooding, which is very instant, or seemingly very instant.
Right, and that is something, to your point, we saw today, those flood-prone areas that we talk about, that you might know in your neighborhood that, okay, heavy rainstorm is coming. Like this, you talked about feeder roads, parks too, children's playgrounds, because sometimes they're made of concrete. Those don't drain as well. The feeder roads, underpasses, things like that can take on water. I believe this is from our storm tracker, Jaime Garcia. Again, and sometimes it can be so deceiving. You don't know how deep that water might be just looking at standing water on a road here in Houston.
I mean, it's hard to say how deep that water is. Obviously, some of the bigger, high-profile vehicles are getting through it just fine. But I know in my previous car before I sold it, you know, I wouldn't have wanted to go through this.
No, me either.
At all.
Absolutely. So when we look at the rest of the day today, Justin, what are you most concerned about?
I'm most concerned, obviously, where that area of moderate risk, kind of flash flood risk is. So north of Houston, Yes, we'll see some standing water between now and say 3, 4 o'clock locally in Houston. Yep. We've already seen that. But I think the biggest risk over the next 24 hours is going to stay to our north. Now, what happens as that water kind of works through the system?
That's true.
That's the big question.
Right, and all of the flooding right now in Dallas, that's going to drain to the Gulf as well eventually. So pretty wet week this week and potentially some more wet weather next week. Thank you so much, Justin, for joining us. As always, giving more context to the weather stories and the wild weather here in Southeast Texas.
Thank you for having me.
Yes.